everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to get started introducing our seminar series for today. We're the Autism Special Interest Group within ABCT, the Association for Behavioral Cognitive Therapies. My name is Hannah Morton. I am co-chair of the SIG and an autistic psychologist and faculty at UNC Chapel Hill. And we host our seminar series throughout the year, quarterly, virtually, in hopes to help advance the priorities of our SIG. So just to introduce here, for those who may not be familiar, we prioritize conducting work that's aligned with the priorities of the autistic community. We aim to promote meaningful and relevant clinical care. We aim to collaborate with and learn from autistic advocates and other community members. And we prioritize using respectful and affirming language when we're talking about autism and developmental differences. These priorities and more information about our SIG's mission and goals are also on our website. That's abctautism.com. We also newly are on Blue Sky and we're transitioning over from X. So if you have not yet followed us on X or Blue Sky, just choose Blue Sky. But you can find our information here. And this QR code here, if you're not on our listserv, will allow you to directly receive emails from us if you found our webinar today from social media or from the ABCT organization. And we do have several upcoming events later this year. Our next seminar series is on May 9th. And we also are planning several exciting events for everyone in November, coinciding with the convention in New Orleans. And so our pre-conference will be the first day of the convention, as we usually have it offsite, and then we'll have the remainder of the convention in New Orleans. We also are sharing this slide just to highlight that we do rely on your donations to support this work. We do compensate our speakers, including our presenter today. And we also have been able to provide travel awards and autistic member travel stipends for the conference. And we really prioritize and feel these things are important to be able to advance our mission and really, put our, show that we're prioritizing what we say that we do. And so if you are able to provide any monetary support towards our travel awards or towards our other activities and trainings that we provide, scanning that QR code would be much appreciated. And our virtual seminar series today is titled Universal Design in Autism Research and Practice. Our presenter today is Dawn Marie Solais, and I will hand it over to Yoredi to introduce.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yoredi Tavares. I am a clinical psychologist at our Center for Autism at Kennedy Krieger Institute, and I will have the honor to introduce our panelist for today's presentation. A few things before I talk to you about our awesome presenter today. The presentation is going to have some interactive components, so the chat is available for when Dawn Marie prompts everyone to provide answers or share experiences. And we also have a Q&A available where you are able to ask questions during the presentation. We will have time at the end as well to answer questions. Okay, so our presenter today is Dawn Marie Solais. She goes by pronouns she, her, they, and them, and is an author, speaker, consultant, and conference creator, and the founder of NeuroAwesome Life. While embracing her own neurodivergence, Dawn Marie is highly adept at identifying what makes each person unique and how that uniqueness can be better understood and utilized, helped and accommodated, seen and celebrated. She works to do more than simply acknowledge the neurodivergent population. Her books, consulting, talks, and events reach deeply into the reality of lived experiences and shine light on and create solutions for what's wonderful, what's hard, and what's needed for neurodivergent adults and children. She is a mom of 3 adult neurodivergent children and a wife to a neurodivergent husband. They all live together with their dogs, cats, ferret, and ball python. Thank you so much for being with us, Dawn Marie. Please go ahead.
Dawn Marie, I'm going to
Thank
stop
you.
sharing and you can go ahead and share your slides.
Okay, great. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Um, I feel like I'm a little bit of a floating head. Am I balanced okay? I can tip my camera a bit. I'm balanced. Okay.
I think you
All
look
right.
great.
I was slouching when you first came on, so I'm like, oh, all right. Um, I am going to be doing a bit of directly speaking and reading throughout this, so hang in there with me while I do both. Um, I am gonna share my screen. All right. Can everyone see that? I hope.
Yes.
Okay. All righty. So I am Dawn Marie Solais. Um, and like has already been said, I'm an author, a speaker, consultant, and advocate. I design and put on conferences about neurodiversity, and I'm working hard to make sure that the most up-to-date information, support, and advocacy gets out there by, with, and for neurodivergent people. My focus tends to be autism and ADHD, but neurodivergence is a huge umbrella, and I do my best to make sure that the full community is acknowledged and helped where I can. I started my professional career as a teacher, um, and I was working hard to make sure that I was teaching to the individual rather than teaching to a singular standard. I concentrated on learning styles in college and wanted to bring what I knew to the middle school and high school classrooms. I found out quickly that public education and much private education didn't really appreciate my approach at the time. We're talking 30 years ago. I know things have evolved, but at the time, even though I consistently got better than average results with my students, that personal approach wasn't celebrated in my work environments. So, with a really broken heart, I transitioned to helping people individually through coaching and consulting, um, both individually and small groups. Uh, and that eventually evolved into teaching, coaching, and consulting on emotional intelligence. A lot of that emotional intelligence stuff was why I went into teaching to begin with. I was a different learner. And even though I did well in school, those differences in my learning style created some pretty significant barriers to my education. In large part, the way educators felt about me and interacted with me, and unfortunately, how some of those educators encouraged the classroom to think about me and interact with me. My learning differences, my communication differences became a barrier to my being able to participate safely in my education. And I didn't want that to happen to anybody else. So I wanted to be a teacher. And I thought for a couple of decades that emotional intelligence was the key to helping people be more embracing of the differences we all have. Um, but about 6 years ago, I discovered that all of my individual clients were autistic, ADHD, or both. So I did what I always do, which was to just dive headfirst and deeply into research so that I could better help my clients. That's when I discovered my identity as a neurodivergent person. I now know that I'm autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, dyscalculic, and dyspraxic. Additionally, a little more than 3 years ago, I was hit as a pedestrian by a car, which, amongst other things, caused a traumatic brain injury, pretty significant one. I'm still struggling with the results of that brain injury, including still being in physical, occupational, and speech therapy. There are a number of things that are now hard for me that weren't hard for me before the accident. Even though I'm speaking pretty well right now, I have to put a tremendous amount of thought and physical effort into maintaining a stutter and stammer-free speech pattern. The longer I talk, the harder that's going to be. So a little later on, we might bump into some of how hard this is for me, but we'll hang in there together. My personal story is cram-packed with how society, environments, physical structures, technology, and more are exclusive of and disabling to me, whether that was before the accident or because of the accident. When I discovered the concept of universal design, I got so excited. Here was a theory dedicated not only to making things better for differing abilities and disabilities, but it was doing it in a way that most people would benefit. Here was a set of practices that might make sure no one gets left out. So again, I dove in. I learned about it, and now I share it with others as part of my education and advocacy work within neurodivergence. Today, we're going to learn the very basics. This is a concept that you can bring to almost every aspect of your professional and personal life. But there's no way we have time to really dig in like that. So we're going to get the very basics, and hopefully that's going to set you up with a desire to learn more. And some ideas about how you can start implementing these concepts in your life and your professional work. Our focus today overall is the autistic individual and community. Like I said before, my neurodivergence has been a benefit to me and a hardship because of the world before the accident. The accident took some of those things that were hard for me, but weren't quite such an impediment, and amplified them tremendously. The brain injury has taken what was a manageable level of sensory challenges and has made a lot of that very, very hard to manage. I've had to learn a whole new set of self-accommodations and requests for accommodations to deal with light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, motion sensitivity. There's a whole new level of hard that is my life now. And it has just amplified my desire to get better at these concepts of universal design and to share them with others. I'm going to ask all of you to think about the people you know who are autistic. Maybe that's you yourself. But additionally, to just think about you. What in your environments, communication styles, presentations, ability to understand others, all of the ways we exist in the world, what's kind of rough for you? Doesn't always go well. And have you thought of some ways that maybe they could go better if there was a change to an environment, something removed from or added to a communication style? What if you could better communicate how your brain works and understand better how others' brains work? Would that benefit your life? Because the big thing about universal design is it starts by focusing on the person least likely to be involved, but it designs in a way that benefits them and others. And that's what's so important. It's not just about singling someone out. It's about making sure that all things get at least a little bit better.
Don Marie, this is your ID. Are you still in your first slide?
I am still in my first slide.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that if we were moving them, we could see them. Appreciate it.
Okay, I'm about to move it, so we'll see if it
Awesome.
works. Where to go? Did
Perfect.
that work for everybody else?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, so I've already started with why of a little bit of universal design. Like I said, I'm a big promoter of this concept. I also struggle with it mightily. As these two words suggest, universal design, we really are trying to scoop up as many different kinds of people as possible. That makes for a lot of mental work. And quite frankly, sometimes I just don't want to do it. Sometimes I think I know the answer, and why do I need to jump through all of the hoops? And so I'm going to present this with full clarity that even though I love these ideas, I promote these ideas, and I believe in these ideas, these are not necessarily always the easiest to embrace and implement. But I've seen time and time again in my own experience and out there in the world, when they're implemented well, they do gorgeous things. Oh, here we go. One of the things that can be really difficult to be reflective about is if we're leaving people out. One of the places that I bumped into this a number of years ago, before I'd actually begun to understand my own neurodivergence, was in the world of emotional therapy. I was just getting started, and I had chunked through 3 different therapists, getting progressively worse with each one. And I was desperate. I knew I needed help. I have a long-time diagnosis of complex PTSD. I knew I needed the right therapy environment. But each of these sweet people doing their utmost best for me were not approaching me in a way that was being helpful. I was getting dramatically worse. And so again, before I understood that I was autistic ADHD and the rest of the list, and before I knew about universal design, I did know about learning styles. And I started to realize that because no therapist had really tried to get to know how my brain works, how I take in information, process it, and how I might give it back, they were approaching me from a kind of standardized space that wasn't working for me. I now know through research that autistic people and sometimes ADHD people as well, we have a different way of storing and accessing memory. If you add some of the other neurodivergent categories that are part of my identity, that way of storing and processing memory becomes even more unique. And for me, when you ask me to think about something from my past, I have 2 choices. An onlooker perspective or an immersive perspective. And what I learned during that time of trying to find the right therapist was that I had to be very careful of my choice of how to relay my experiences to my therapist. I was getting very immersed in my past experiences, which meant I was reliving them in almost every possible way. My memory is so visual and sensory that it was as if those things were happening again. And I was being asked to talk about these things over and over and over. And it wasn't working. So one of the things I've done since universal design is I've started talking to groups of therapists. What can we do to understand the individual in front of us without losing that great sort of standardized approach? I'm not antagonistic to some of the standards. We need them. But maybe we do have to know a bit more about how the person in front of us processes input, accesses and processes memory. Maybe there are some things we need to know, right? So when we're thinking about our practices, when we're thinking about our research, any of those things, might we be leaving some people out with our current models and methods? And I use the word accidentally very purposefully. I don't think there's a single person here today that would be like, oh yeah, there are people I just want to cut out. I mean, certainly there are boundaries we need to set. That's very real. But our humanity, probably the reason we're doing the work that we're doing is that we have a pretty big heart. We want to help people. We really don't want people who need help to not have it. We might recognize we're not exactly the right person for a specific individual, but that general perspective of, gosh, I really want people to have the help they need, that's probably very real for everyone here in attendance today. So this concept of universal design, that's going to give you an opportunity to kind of make sure you're not making those really unintended mistakes of, shoot, this person I'm trying to help is getting a little bit excluded from my efforts, and I need to find out why. Universal design is not compromise if compromise is defined by everyone losing something. Universal design can certainly be looked at as a really good way to find the right kind of compromises in a group of people. But compromise is almost always looked at as, I give up something, you give up something. We find something in the middle that neither one of us is particularly thrilled about, but okay, we'll live with it. That's not universal design. The goal of universal design is for everyone to gain something. We want people to come away feeling like the person least likely to participate really benefited, and the people who had an easier time of participating find their participation better. There's something a little more comfortable, a little more joy-filled, a little more good about what's going on for them. All right, I gotta go back to my script. All right. So before we get to this slide, I jumped ahead. My presentation today is designed from a universal design perspective, focusing on people with visual processing challenges and disabilities. Because of that, it's very simple. It doesn't have any pictures, graphs, visuals. I've left out a lot that would kind of, in an artistic way, make this more attractive. And there are definitely more attractive ways to universally design a presentation for people with visual input challenges and disabilities. I did not personally, with all of my challenges and disabilities, have the capacity to create that for today. I would have needed some help. So I made the decision to keep it simple and straightforward. But I'd like to explain to you some of the things because that's going to help with this idea of universal design. Like I said, I'm dyslexic. In the past few years, neuroscience has uncovered the fact that the dyslexic neurotype is one that is designed for 3D mental images. Many of us can think in moving, three-dimensional pictures. When we don't know how to train this brain to the fact that not everything needs to be three-dimensional, we can struggle. Like with reading, the brain needs to process the written and printed word as two-dimensional. The brain needs to leave everything exactly where it is and just accept that as complete. The dyslexic brain sees everything as three-dimensional. We can often describe the sides, back, bottom, and tops of things based on whatever a small part of an item we can see. Our brains fill in the blanks, often very accurate. This does not help with reading, photos, paintings, or anything else that has all of its information on a flat surface. Our brains will try to make something three-dimensional out of it, and that can be disabling. However, many of us can learn how to tell our brains to leave the information alone and just accept it as complete. The better we can do that, the less disabling our neurotype is. One of the things that really helps a dyslexic person and people with other visual processing challenges is visual space. When letters are a little larger than average, with very little extra fanciness, like sans serif, and when there is actual space around the words, they are easier to read. Different colors can make reading more difficult for some and easier for others. And images can be very difficult to process, especially in PowerPoints, when there's that distance from us to the image, or when it's in a virtual meeting like this, and we don't have control over the size and pixel content of what we're looking at. I've done what I can to hopefully make this an easy to visually perceive presentation. It's not going to work for absolutely everyone, but hopefully I've done a good enough job that it works well enough for most. My dyslexia, along with some of the changes and challenges that have come with the TBI, the traumatic brain injury, it's very possible that you're going to find mistakes in what I've done here today. I have gone over and over and over this presentation, but my brain just sometimes won't see what's wrong. And so please extend grace if you do see mistakes. But also it's a great opportunity to kind of climb into this idea of what are we thinking about when we do see somebody make a mistake? What are we thinking about when we see somebody doing something differently than we would do it? Our society is pretty heavily loaded with judgment. We get taught from very early on, there's right and there's wrong. Those of us who are working in the world of emotional development, emotional intelligence, emotional regulation, those sorts of things, we know there's a lot more than the binary of right and wrong. But even for us, that can still be hard to put into practice. We have preferences. We have things that work for us. We have stuff that just makes sense for us. And when we see somebody doing it differently, that can really challenge how we feel about them. We might feel like they're doing it wrong. They just are. They're doing it wrong. And if they only knew better, it would fix it. We might think maybe they're not a nice person. We might develop all kinds of ideas about somebody because how they're presenting themselves, the mistake we think they've made, just gives us an idea about who they are. That's a space where autistic people live all the time. We are negatively judged by the way we think, by the way we speak, our facial expressions, our body language, whether or not we sit still or fidget, the way we structure our sentences, whether or not verbal communication is our preferred method or even an available choice for us. There's constant judgment coming in our direction about who we are and how we are. And one of the big things going on in autism advocacy right now is to kind of ask everybody to lighten up a bit on that, right? To get to know the autistic person and value them for who they are, to maybe create spaces, community environments that don't ask them to change, but include them in better ways. That's a step in the direction of universal design. Making sure that we're thinking of people as valid the way they are, not acceptable, right? That means I'm right, they're wrong, but I'll accept it. Not acceptable the way they are, valid. They're right in who they are. And the more we can start thinking about people who are different from us as right as them, different for sure, but right. Probably the most easy to think of analogy of things being different but right, apples and oranges, right? We use that expression constantly in English-speaking countries. We may say it's because it's different, but we say it's different in a way that both are valid. Apples and oranges, they're both fruit, but they're so different from each other. One's not better than the other. This is kind of the thinking that gets us in a universal design perspective. Instead of the binary of right and wrong, it's a universal perspective of different but right, different but valid, different and it belongs. When we're thinking about autistic people, there are a few things that I wanted to kind of state up front. These are things that you probably all know. I'm not trying to suggest anything by including these, except I just want to kind of bring them to thought. When we're talking about universal design, there are some things that I just kind of wanted to seed plant, right? Just make sure these things are ramming around in thought. Identity first versus person first language. There are people who prefer what they prefer. I am not trying to advocate for either. I am personally an identity first person. When I talk about myself, I talk about myself as an autistic person. I don't talk about myself as a person with autism. But again, because that's my personal preference, I'm not trying to say mine's better. What I do want us to think about is that when an autistic person reaches adulthood, there tends to be a preference for identity first language. We don't have time today to dive deeply into what that might mean about the adult autistic community, but it does indicate something about a large percentage of adult autistic people and how they think about themselves. They have embraced autism as who they are, or part of who they are, in general, more than something that has been imposed upon them It still may mean they think of being autistic as very disabling, very difficult, all of those things. But they've embraced autism as part of their identity description, as opposed to an imposition, something imposed upon them, something that came upon them. The deficits model versus the social model. Again, I'm not trying to educate here. I'm just trying to bring things to the front of thought. The deficits model is what we find in the DSM-5, right? We know somebody's autistic if they can't do or they struggle to do this list of things. Where the social model tends to look at disabling factors, external factors, more than internal factors. And again, when we're talking about the autistic adult, and there aren't tons of statistic models for this, but the ones that do exist tend to indicate that the autistic adult has a preference for the social model. Again, not everybody, and I'm not trying to advocate for one or the other. I'm just trying to state this so that we have some places to start thinking if we're going to be thinking universally. This is one you've probably all heard, right? No two autistic people are alike. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. How on earth do you universally design for a community cram-filled with people who aren't alike? This is the thing that is part of my advocacy. I do not describe autism as a disability in and of itself. My advocacy in education presents autism as a valid neurotype, a way of thinking that all autistic people start with. So like that pattern recognition, that appreciation for consistency and constancy, some of those things that we really can point out, pinpoint in your average autistic person, whether they are very disabled by intellectual and other disabilities, or they are not, right? There's something pretty recognizable about an autistic person if they're not heavily masking. Even so, we're all really, really different in so many ways, but those things that are the same, we may experience and express them to different levels, different degrees, and in different ways, but they're part of who we are. This one's really important in thinking about universal design. Often when we're thinking about programs, procedures, things like that for autistic people, children or adults, we're thinking about individuals with disabilities. And from from a universal design perspective, that can be awesome because universal design starts with the person least likely to be able to participate, right? So that might be somebody with a pretty significant disability of some kind. But universal design tries hard to make sure we don't leave anybody out. So we need to make sure that when we're thinking about autistic people, we've got everybody at least somewhat in mind. Okay, I'm jumping ahead in my brain. This is another thing. One of the reasons why you find a lot of autistic adults not appreciating therapeutic approaches that start with behavior is because they have felt that those behavioral approaches have taught them to mask, taught them to cover up who they are, hide who they are, and they have found it really damaging to themselves. Most autistic adults will say that though masking may make them more palatable to non-autistic people, it's exhausting, mentally, physically draining. Sometimes compounds their trauma. There's a lot about being required to mask that really just doesn't work for the autistic person. So again, when we're thinking about designing our programs, whether they're for an individual or they're for a large group, we want to make sure that we're thinking about, are we asking a person to be something they're not? Or are we really working hard to make sure what we are creating brings out the most natural, true to self pieces of that person and that community? Many autistic people are neurodivergent in at least one other way. There are so many neurodivergent people, autistic people that are multi-divergent. And this is another thing that's going to be good to remember when you're designing. Being autistic isn't a tiny little box where everybody lives. There, you know, the Venn diagram of autism and ADHD, there's so much overlap. So much so that some researchers are trying to consider, should AUDHD, AUDHD, which means autism and ADHD combined in a neurotype, should that be its own neurotype? Others are trying to decide if autism and ADHD are truly separate neurotypes. Are they actually pieces of the same one? So when we're thinking about autistic people, we need to remember one of the ways no two autistic people are alike is that they have a lot of other stuff going on in their sweet brains. And those are things that we might need to take into consideration. Right now, the most consistent statistics I could find, right, in the English-speaking world was that 20 to 25% of the world's population is neurodivergent of some kind, and between 1 to 4% are autistic. Here's the thing. Autism and ADHD are commonly missed in girls and women, leading to large speculation that these numbers are low. Even people who are adamant that they are not autistic, they just might not have an understanding of autism that lets them investigate their own mind. This was me when my kids were teenagers. All three of my kids as teenagers came to me and said, "Mom, we think we are autistic, ADHD, or both." And I said, "You're not any of those things." And I had a list of reasons as to why not. I now know how wrong I was. My understanding of what autism is, what ADHD is, was really, really wrong. I didn't know what I know now, and there's so much now that I'm sure I still don't know. I'm learning every day. So when we're thinking about what makes an autistic person, who is an autistic person, we need to remember things like this. There's what we know we don't know, and what we don't know, we don't know. And keeping that always kind of fresh and forward in thought helps us keep our minds open to individuals who may present differently than we expect, but are legitimately in that category of autistic.
Marie, we have a question in the chat in the Q&A.
Great.
I can read it to you and you can decide if that's something you're gonna touch on later. You let me know.
Okay.
Yeah? Okay. So the question is, from your experience, what type of tools, resources, or support systems do you believe schools, institutions, and educators need in order to create truly inclusive environments for neurodivergent individuals, including those with dyslexia and autism?
I love that question. It's an entire subject unto itself, and one I do give talks on. Find my simple answer. I can't do like all the tools and all the things. It's too big a question for now, and I apologize. I don't want that to seem like I'm minimizing the need when you ask that question. I just don't have time for it right now. My belief is that if we can do more to support teachers being able to create in-class environments where they can get to know their students more personally and design individualized education plans for their students. Right now, we do individualized education plans for people with known disabilities. And I've talked to a number of students and parents who get frustrated because their student would really benefit from that individualized education plan, but they're not allowed to have it because they don't have a diagnosed disability. A number of autistic children face this because, for example, where I live, there's on average an 18-month to 3-year waiting period to get someone diagnosed. So you're talking about somebody going through as much as 3 years of school without the appropriate supports. No one noticed I was autistic all the way through school. I didn't get told I was dyslexic until I was in the 10th grade of high school. And the only thing they taught me to do was read with my finger. That helped, but it wasn't anywhere near what I needed. Right? So my sort of top level answer to that is every student really needs each year's worth of teachers to get to know how they learn, how they think, how they process, what is challenging their learning, what would amplify their learning, and do the best to support that child in the things that would remove barriers and amplify the success. I chose not to mention it before, but I'm going to mention it now. This is my book, My Dramatic and Inappropriate Neuro Awesome Life. And I mention this because this is a universally designed piece of printed material. I did a lot of research to understand what are the barriers for neurodivergent people to physical reading material. My number one response was the spine of the book. If people could not get their book to lay flat or be able to bend it back on itself without damaging the spine, they had a tendency not to interact with the printed material. The next was how much space there was on the page and the size of the print. Now, I don't know if you can tell because we're virtual, but this is gray paper. Gray is a color that is fairly universally calming to the eye when reading. You can see there's all this space everywhere on the page, right? These are things that make it easier for somebody who has visual processing challenges to interact with this. I also, and believe me, the printers thought I was insane, I felt and smelled hundreds of different kinds of paper. The paper that makes this book has as little smell and as smooth without being like some papers are smooth, but they feel slick. So it's not slick, it's smooth, right? There's nothing here for almost everybody that's going to feel badly or
That's
smell badly.
textured.
Excuse me?
That's textured. The pages
Sure,
are.
yeah.
Mhm.
So this book was designed to remove as many impediments as possible for someone who may struggle to interact with reading material. And one of the reasons I did this was because I wanted to start showing this to education publishers. You've got that little kiddo who loves their books at home, their cardboard books, their big print picture books, things like that. And then they get somewhere to around the second, third, or fourth grade, and they pull way back from their joy of reading. And one of my theories was it's the material, the physical material of the book that's getting in the way. So that's why I say I don't have time to go into all of the tools and all of the things that could possibly make it better for everybody in a classroom. But if we can start thinking about ways to support the teacher in learning who those kiddos are, how they learn, how they process, and possibly most, maybe top of the list is when you see that kid that's doing it differently, assume something good is going on. The kid that's looking out the window might be distracted. We may need to help them with that. But we also may need to acknowledge that some people will hear you better if they're not looking at you. They will literally process better what you're saying if they're looking away from you. We need to know which that is. And when we are taught a standardized approach to education, we're taught a standardized approach to behaviors, right? Some schools have little feet swings under the desk because we now know that many individuals hear and process information better when their body is moving. That's a serious truth for ADHD people. I have under my desk a little elliptical, right? It's just this little set of pedals, and this is the range of motion, right? It's this very small movement. But when I'm sitting here typing away, I think better when my feet are working on the elliptical. So I know these things about myself, but what do we do to kids in school? I can do this, I'm an adult. And I am privileged enough to have had the money to buy the thing. But what do we do for kids in school? Sit, be still, look forward, don't move, right? We do a lot of things that quite honestly makes it easier for me to teach to a class. Visual movement makes it harder for me to concentrate. But whenever I do in-person talks, one of the first things I do is invite people to get up and walk around. If you need to move while I'm talking, I will do my best to keep my attention where I need to, because in order for you to pay attention, you need to do what you're going to do. Universal design perspective starts with whoever you are right. Our general societal model doesn't say that. Our general societal model says there's a very narrow window for right. And if you fall outside of that, you need to fix yourself. So whether we're talking about kids in school or we're talking about any of the individuals who might live with us in our home, when we're talking about ourselves, what perspective are we coming from? That narrow window of correctness? Or what I view as the more realistic view of humanity? Really varied, beautifully and interestingly unique, valid. Universal design starts from who you are is right. And who the person next to you is right. And who the person is next to them is right. And we all belong. If that's true, they're right, they're right, they're right, and they all belong. Now what? That's the starting place for universal design. I hope all of that helped somebody. I know that wasn't exactly an answer to the question, but it's what I've got right now.
Those were such good resources and ideas and recommendations, Don Marie. Someone in the Q&A mentioned to you, precisely to your point of how we can better help students and the barriers that may be in place, that the food swings are to 250, $250. And even though, we would love to have those available for students that need it, the funds are not there.
Right. So what do we do? And again, I'm going to start with supporting the teacher. When the teacher is well supported, more of the students will be too. That is my personal perspective. And if we're supporting the teacher to be able to come up with ideas for their students, more of those kids are going to get what they need. I'm not personally a big fan of top-down, make it the same for everybody perspectives, though I'm not going to try to suggest there's never a moment for that. Sometimes somebody's got to make a decision, and sometimes it's going to be a little more standardized than I would personally enjoy. It just is, right? And I share these ideas in a deeply imperfect world, right? So I'm not trying to say all of this is going to be easy, all of this is going to work all of the time. But I do think that if we're supporting the teachers for a classroom, or we're supporting whatever the individual is that's kind of leading an environment. So maybe that's the therapist in a therapy group. Maybe that's a head researcher, right? Whatever the environment is, pardon me, please. If we're supporting them to be as expansive a thinker as possible, and to be able to gain as much knowledge as possible about the people they're trying to serve and the people they're working with, we're going to do somewhat better. We just are. There's going to be an elevation to our ability to do well. Yeah. Okay. We've got a trigger warning on this, but I think this is incredibly important as we move forward. Statistics for life expectancy in autistic adults range from about 10 to 20 years less than non-autistic people, with the lesser expectancy, meaning that 20 years less, being in autistic people with intellectual disabilities. In both the United States and the United Kingdom, studies say that more than 60% of autistic adults report thinking about suicide. Many studies list this as the #1 cause of early death for autistic people. Here are a couple of links. I think you'll get this slide deck. Will they get this slide deck?
We post the slides on the website. Yeah, with the recording, it will be
great.
posted.
Okay, so these links will be available to you. These are just two of many. When I'm talking about statistics, I have gone out and pulled as many different voices together and come up with averages, because there's there's almost always a wide range in perspective on topics like this. But these are two that I thought I could point you to get you started if you want to research any of this. All right. Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, DEIB. Right now, we are in the United States, we are in a political environment that is trying to get rid of this. If you feel willing and able, take a second and put something in the chat about why you think DEI or DEIB is not working well. Not necessarily why people hate it. Why is it not actually working well? I'm going to see if I can look at the chat. Here we go.
And
I know one of the, okay, it's not getting enough support. I can, why, yes. That's absolutely true. One of the things that's been shared with me, I go into workplaces and help people understand how to work in diverse environments, with a focus on autism and ADHD. And one of the things that I hear from people who do not view themselves as being disabled in any way by their work environment say, I would benefit from a standing desk. How come they get a standing desk and I don't? I would benefit from a desk lamp. How come they get one and I don't? I would benefit from fill in the blank. How come they get one and I don't? And I know that can sound kind of gross, right? Well, they get one because they have a disability. Duh, right? We're trying to make it so that they can work here. You're fine. Universal design says, if you think that would make your life better, I wonder if we could get that for you because your life should be better. Whether you have a disability, there's a disabling factor or not, if you could be more comfortable, more successful, more joyful, why don't we try to do that? Right? Okay.
there's a comment on the chat, Dawn Marie, that says that the US is mainly individualistic society and it's hard for some to think of others.
True. Possibly one of the more common complaints about us autistic people is that we have a hard time thinking about others. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. I know that there are definitely autistic people in my circle that perspective is what seems obvious. For them, it's not that they're not thinking about others, it's their hierarchy of priorities, right? I need to solution this before I can solution this. If I'm not okay, I don't know how to help other people be okay. But they're not necessarily putting that energy out there into the world. They're just like, no, I'm not dealing with you because I need my thing, right? So yeah, we are an individualistic society. It is hard to think about other people. And we get taught that if you need help, maybe you're not as valuable as somebody who doesn't need help. So going back to what I said earlier, value, validity, we've got to start with everybody in the same space. Everyone is valuable. Everyone is valid. Just a quick yes or no. Do we think DEIB is still needed in 2025 when our government is forcibly removing it from everywhere? No is a totally good answer. Do not be afraid to put it there.
I'm gonna read to you, Dawn Marie.
Yes.
Yes, even more so, and yes.
All right.
Yes, more
Yeah.
than ever.
Okay. A no answer could be DEIB isn't working. So burn it down, start again. That's real, right? In a lot of places it's not working, or we wouldn't have the almost audible cheers within our country of getting rid of it. People don't think it's working.
You have a comment, Dawn Marie, in the chat. The way it says, the way you have explained challenges of ASD is what is missing in DEI. I learned a lot today about the problem that in any neurodiversity celebration event. I learned a lot. I'm gonna repeat that. I learned a lot today about the problems, and I guess it means learn more than in any neurodiversity celebration event. Thank you to the person that posted that.
That's great. I'm so glad to hear that. And kudos to all of you who put this event together. I'm going to leave what might make DEIB work better for those who oppose it to your own internal thinking. One of the most difficult pieces of universal design is being willing to include people we wish we didn't have to. People who think differently than us in places where we feel are maybe our highest important spaces. That might be politically. That might be so a real common argument for autistic adults is yes, ABA therapy, no ABA therapy, right? That's a battlefield line in the sand for a lot of people. When we're thinking universal design, we're not thinking, do I agree with one side or the other? We're thinking, what's going to work in a way that these folks are going to feel like they can coexist. Like I said in the beginning, I love this stuff. I promote this stuff. I'm passionate about this stuff. And sometimes I don't want to do it. Maybe I think I have the best idea, and why do I need to ask anybody else? Why do I need to learn anything? I already know enough. Why do I need to include people who are going to drive me nuts? My answer to that is because I'm in the excluded category. If anything is going to get better, I cannot repeat the behavior that is being put upon me. If anything in my world is going to get better, I actually need the people who don't agree with me and don't like me. I don't live in a vacuum. And if I'm going to do my work well, I have to care about people that challenge me, sometimes to my very core. I have to care that their life gets better. Because if I don't, the fight, the division will never have a chance to abate. All right. Here's a definition. And this comes from this specific website. This is a definition based on physical spaces, but it's good enough that we can expand our thinking to just about everything. And I'm going to read it. Universal design is the design and composition of an environment so that it can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of their age, size, or disability. This includes public places in the built environments such as buildings, streets, or spaces that the public have access to, products and services provided in those places, and systems that are available, including information and communication technology. Whoops. Sorry about that.
That's okay. And someone and just to make you feel better, even though it doesn't matter, someone just shared that it was very powerful where you were what you were just sharing before, the definition about including people and the diversity, the importance of diversity.
Thank you. I'm so glad. All right, and again, a couple of links. These are not the only ways to get information about universal design, but this will get you started. Okay. When you're thinking about the basics of universal design, you need to start with who are you trying to serve, okay? So for the context of this, we're trying to serve autistic people. As we've already discussed, that's a really big job. Every autistic person is unique. So again, I love this stuff, and the enormity of it can make me want to go back to bed, right? I am not trying to say that any of this is easy. I personally think it's very exciting, and when you get into it, you might really love it. But you're never going to actually get everyone. It's just really important that that's the way you're thinking, right? That I want to focus on the autistic community. But if I only focus on the autistic community, will I be coming up with the answers that actually best serve the autistic community? We'll talk about that a little bit. The fact that we only have 14 minutes left is blowing my mind. So of those people you're trying to serve, who's the least likely to be able to participate in what you are designing? Design with them and for them. That's incredibly important. Design with them. Your target community and those least likely to be able to participate, make sure they are part of your research and design process, or it won't truly be a universal design process, okay? The final design needs to be as close to leaving no one out as possible. A ramp into a building is an example of a universal design project. I'm old enough that I remember the arguments about whether or not buildings needed ramps and some of the non-universal design things that happened. People tried wheelchairs that had these things that would latch onto the stairs and climb the wheelchair up the stairs. Nobody could come up with a method of doing that didn't dump people out of their wheelchairs. They were very dangerous, right? There were a lot of different things that were designed for the specific individual. They were really good attempts. They didn't work. Part of the reason they didn't work is because they were too myopic. Not everybody in a wheelchair has their own stability, right? Which is why so many wheelchair people were falling out of these chair climbing wheelchairs. A ramp into a building gave the most people access, and it was usable by everybody. An elevator is another example. Gives the most people access, usable by everyone. Dimmable LED lights. It's really interesting in office environments where dimmable LED lights have been put in as the overhead lighting. Not only do people with light sensitivity like me enjoy bringing the light down, but entire office environments felt better when there were different options for the level of overhead light. And if people needed more light than the overhead was providing, they could have an individual light for their desk. Entire office environments reported being benefited, not just people with light sensitivities. Handicap restroom stalls are intended to be universally designed, and they are often not. There's so much wrong with the standard of handicap restroom stalls, I don't have time to get into this right now, but if you've been in one and you think about it, there's so much wrong in there. Now that I have some mobility challenges because of the accident, I am even more aware of what's wrong in those stalls. So even when we try, we don't always get it right. This is a list of what to be thinking about if, and again, this is if you're designing a physical space, but you can take these ideas and adjust them to a procedure, a therapy, a classroom perspective, right? You can take these and adjust them. And I'm not going to go through these right now because we're quickly running out of time. But you'll have the slides for these. This will just continue to help you as you try to plan for something. Continue thinking about how to go about it in a universal way. I wanted to have time for you to see this video. We do not have time for you to see this video, but this is brilliant. So when you have access to these slides, or if you want to, go to my YouTube channel. It's on my YouTube channel. This is an architecture firm that participated in my conference in 2022. And I asked them if they could please do like a little mini documentary on their process of designing internal spaces from a universal design perspective. And so this is a great little video. I think it's like 14 or 17 minutes long. And it'll show you a brilliant work environment that was designed with universal design practices. Whoops. When you're thinking about your work, there's so many different spaces where universal design practices can be put into action, right? Physical environments we've just talked about. What about inter-office communications? This is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. When we type those emails, send those texts, how many times are we misunderstood, or do we misunderstand others? The written word is rough. We often miscommunicate, but there are a lot of different reasons for that. Some of which are those visual processing challenges. People don't have to be dyslexic to appreciate bullet points of what's really needed, right? Shorter, more direct communications. Some people will have a really hard time processing what you say if it's not super polite. That might sound odd. I did some contract work for somebody in Boston, and they literally could not read a request from me if the word please was in the wrong part of the sentence for them. I'm an information first person, politeness second, right? So I enjoy it when people are polite to me, but what I really need is the information. So I'm going to be really focused hard on the information to make sure I understand. So I had a tendency to put what I needed first, right? Would you be able to do this for me, please? This man could not even deal with what I needed because please was at the end of the sentence. So for him, I needed to say, would you please, or please would you? Or I couldn't deal with my stuff. And at the time, I was so grumpy about this. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? You can't deal with me if I don't put please in the right spot. This was way before I understood autism, neurodivergence, any of those things. And I wasn't offering the grace of what I did know, different learning styles, right? He needed information in a particular order or his brain wouldn't process it. And I can be grumpy about that, or I can just decide he's right and valid as he is, and it's okay with me to just do what he needs. I can do that. That's something that I can do. If he was asking me to do something I couldn't do, we would have to have a conversation about that. If we're in situations where we literally can't give what we're being asked, that's when we can bring some of this universal design perspective to the table and we can have a conversation. I think what you're asking is real, valid, and important. It is also something I'm not going to be able to accomplish. Can we work together so I can find a way to give you what you need in a way that you can understand? Because right now, we're not going to be able to work together. If I come from the perspective of, I can't do that, I won't do that, you're ridiculous, you can't ask me, then we're done. But if I come from the perspective of, I can't do that, but maybe there's something I can do, help me find it, that's a whole different world. And that is a tiny way to bring universal design perspective into the way you work, whether it's communication, whether it's being in an office with someone else, right? If somebody else needs music and I can't tolerate the sound, I can't think if there's other sound, right? We need to work together because I'm not wrong and they're not wrong. We're both right. And we both need to be able to work in the same environment together. So how can we do well for each other? That's always the goal. How can we do well for each other?
Domery, you have two questions about this topic. Um, I'm going to read to you. You share about the book. You share about the book page texture, etc., for support in reading. How about reading or working on computer screen? Do they feel more control over settings to change font and color, or need more features to be inclusive? That's the first one.
So in answer to that, some people, yes, but we've learned some interesting things in neuroscience about the way the brain processes information. Digital or virtual doesn't solve all problems. There's something unique about the way our brains relate to physical things. So for some people, yes, that virtual experience of the written word can be brilliant. One of the things that helps me is in some reading apps, you can run a program where you only see one word at a time, and you can adjust the speed of how quickly you see those words. For a dyslexic person, only seeing one word at a time significantly limits our brain's desire to go make 3D images out of tons of information on a page, right? That's why we tend to cover up the words on the page or use our fingers to read. We're trying to get our brain to focus. Those apps just do that for us, one word at a time, and we can tend to read a lot faster and retain more with a program like that, but it doesn't work for everybody. So again, if we're looking at the individual, some individuals are going to be benefited by the virtual. But if we go exclusively virtual, we might be missing some of that other, when we're talking about kids, brain development, which is really important, and the way they process. So if we go back to a physical book, if we produce more physical books that are more accessible, and we have the digital, the virtual accessibility tools, we're going to be able to get more of their brain involved in reading, understanding, processing, all of that stuff.
Great. Your last question, Marie, is when researchers or professionals carry out community needs assessments, focus on neurodivergent populations, what do you believe should absolutely be included in those questionnaires?
Okay.
And I'm happy to repeat it if you need me to.
Yes, please.
Yes. When researchers or professionals carry out community needs assessments focus on neurodivergent populations, what do you believe should absolutely be included in those questionnaires?
Okay. Questionnaires and surveys are a great place. There's so much that is disabling about surveys and questionnaires, even for the average person. You may have noticed in my verbal communication, I sometimes put sentences in a different order than you might. It's something I've had to work on a lot since the brain injury. The brain injury, for some reason, has kind of rearranged subject, object, verb stuff in my head. And I have to concentrate really hard to make sure I put things in an order that's understandable to the most people. But I still fall back into some of that, whatever it is my brain is doing. I'll put things in. It's not understandable, but it takes a whole lot more effort to know what I'm saying, right? We can accidentally put our communication style into a survey and a questionnaire. It makes complete and total sense to us, but we're not getting the results that we thought we would back, right? That's because people aren't fully understanding what we're asking. When you're asking an autistic or an autistic ADHDer a question, keep in mind that even though for autistics we might be very binary thinkers, yes, no thinkers, right? But that is often a misunderstanding of what's actually going on in our heads. We now know that autistic brains have significantly more neural pathways than a non-autistic brain. When you ask an autistic person a question, there's more firing in our brains than a non-autistic person. That doesn't mean smarter or not smarter. It means more brain is participating in the activity. If you add elements of ADHD to that, like multidimensional thinker, a multitude of possible answers, all of those things, you might ask what you think is a simple question. And your autistic ADHDer is now stuck because they don't know what answer you want. There are 9,000 of them and they don't know which one you want, right? So if you're talking about surveys and things like that for the neurodivergent community, ask a wide range of people about the language you're using. See if they're understanding your questions. See if they have suggestions for how to reword. Another thing to consider, and we're starting to have survey companies that are providing this feature, not everyone processes the written word well. Some people need to hear it. So for some survey companies, they offer audible additions. So the survey can be read to the person. There's also the possibility of having a video that they could click on, right? So while you fill out the survey, click on this video and the video will take you through the survey and help you understand the questions. So if there's a question that might be a little nuanced, your video could give some examples or some different ways of stating it. There are a number of different things you can do for a survey or a questionnaire to expand the number of people who are able to interact with what you're doing and what you're asking. The main thing for anything you're trying to design is try to get feedback from the people you're hoping to interact with before you do the thing. See if you can find at least a group of friends, a group of people that you know to think with you while you're developing something. It can make a very, very big difference. If you have the opportunity to do more in-depth research, that's great. We don't always have that opportunity, but if you can If you think through the people you know, you probably know at least a few people that maybe think a little differently than you, verbally communicate or written communicate a little differently from you. You want those differences involved in your planning. They're going to help you know if you're asking questions and providing options and things like that that make the most sense to the most people. I hope
Thank
that helps.
I think it was very helpful. Thank you so much, Marie. We are over 2 minutes, so we're ready for your final. I know we could talk about this. I know you can talk about this forever. I know I would too. We're ready for your final thoughts when you're ready.
My website, narrowawesomelife.com, you can contact me through there. If you'd like more education on this from me, I'm happy to work something out with you. But my main thing is we are all very used to operating from our absolute best. And that is laudable and applaudable. We are all putting in our best efforts. And we all know there are some people who aren't benefiting from our efforts the way they could. Universal design theory is a way to get you closer to really doing well for as many people as possible. Yes, it takes sometimes brain-breaking effort. But when you start to get used to these ideas and used to the process, it starts to become more natural and hopefully more enjoyable. And you will start to be able to create environments, create practices that not only do even better for the people you are focused on, but there's these wonderful ripple effects. And those ripple effects are going to tend to be where your biggest support comes from. If we need people to buy in to what we're doing, we have to be designing in a way that benefits the most people. We have to focus on our population that is getting excluded. We absolutely have to. But if we can do it in a way that makes things better for the most people, that's the space we will have the most support. And that's the way we'll really start to make sure things get better. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Marie. Amazing
Thank you, Dawn
presentation.
Marie. We are so grateful to have you join us today. I've shared some links in the chat with information about how to connect with our SIG. And Dawn Marie will be getting the recording from ABCT, from Rachel, who's here today on behalf of Central Office, and we'll be also getting the slides from you so we can post that and the transcript and slides with the recording on our website.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I had so much fun today. I appreciate being included.
Thank you, everyone.